understanding hate. Just thought I would make a few comments about hate. The impeachment vote has just progressed, and it, of course, is a polarizing event. And what I want to do here is just lay out some groundwork of why this situation, why these events are taking place. I think most of us realize there's a lot of hate in play here, and it's been pretty much documented and verified that the Democrats are a party of hate, and liberals, socialism, communism, that left-leaning political divide has been pretty well confirmed to be associated with far more hate, far more negative events than the right. And this isn't some kind of perception or relative assumption. It's not simply due to the right justifying its position against the left and just perceiving the left to be negative because of its own position. There is a clear line of demarcation or a clear philosophical foundation for this difference in attitudes. This isn't something just associated with the Democrats in the U.S. It's a phenomenon that's deeply associated with the left. And the left is not just a political left, it's a moral left. And to really understand the hate of the left, we have to go back much further than politics and much deeper than political parties and ideology, because this goes back to the very beginning of time. This left-right thing, while it's not clearly understood in this world, because of course the distinction has tried to be muddled, and just the way people are, they label themselves not always in precise and accurate ways. But the line does exist, and if you're a Christian, this is quite easy to accept, or easier to accept, because the Bible talks about the sheep and the goats, and the ones on God's right hand being saved and those on God's left condemned to eternal damnation. Now this in itself might be construed to be hateful, condemning people to an eternity of suffering or separation from God. But we'll go back to that in a minute. What we need to look at is where this line is drawn and why. And we can go back to Eden for this, and that Adam and Eve and Satan did not create anything. They had no rights to anything, and they were given great wealth. And yet the one thing God had decreed to be his, that had restricted mankind from enjoying or partaking of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, Adam and Eve desired. We don't need to believe in the story. We can look at it as allegory, or as just as a story with a moral understanding, a moral perspective, in the way that Aesop's fables are. It's immaterial in one sense, because the story is still the same. The lessons are still the same. And that is, the creator has a right to what he creates, and the one who did not create has no claim on the creation of another. So this is my video. No one has a right to claim it as theirs. You can't put your name on it and say, this is you talking, this is your ideas. If you want a video, you make your own. This is my video. And it's as simple as that. It's not complicated. God created the Garden of Eden. The wealth of the Garden of Eden, the good things, belonged to him. He had every right to allocate and distribute as he so choose. But Adam and Eve felt entitled. They felt somehow harmed by God's refusal to give access to everything. And so they created a kind of democracy in which they decided to overthrow God's ownership rights. And so they took what didn't belong to them. And this is called freeloading. It's called the externalization of costs. It's called entitlement. And whatever word you use or however you talk about it or look at it, it always consists of somebody creating something that is valued, and this value being expropriated by someone who did not create it. So the law is that no one has a right to get another person to pay costs they created. You don't have a right to something that someone else has created. This is negative accountability. You have to be accountable for your own costs. And we basically understand that. We know that if somebody's created something or somebody owns something, that's theirs. We're not to take it. And most people understand that if we create costs, these costs are ours to pay. But there's another kind of accountability which is called a positive accountability. And positive accountability means that if somebody creates value that you partake of or enjoy, you have a right to see that that person is paid. So there's an inverse relationship here, that if somebody creates something and we're enjoying it, as Adam and Eve did in the Garden of Eden, we can't just take it and create costs for the other person. We have to make sure they're paid for what enjoyment we're getting. So Adam and Eve was enjoying the fruits of the Garden of Eden. They had an obligation to pay God for all this pleasure, but no, they didn't feel any positive accountability, and in fact they created negative accountability in that they took from God what belonged to God. So it was a double sin, a double error on their part. And this is true whether you want to believe in the divinity of the story or you just want to read it as a story. The morality is still there. The ethical lessons are still valid. Which brings us to the left. And if we are awake, we can see that it's even right in the Garden of Eden, all that the left is, and all the ideology and the mindset and the thinking of the left is all there in the Garden of Eden. And we can trace the leftist philosophy, the leftist ideology throughout history. And it all pertains to this idea that a person with power or a group with power has the justification, the legitimization to take from the creator of wealth. And we see this in democracy. 10 people can't get together and force a store owner to give them protection money. This is called a protection racket, and it's illegal because it's just a group of people using their superior force to extract wealth from somebody who is less powerful. But if these 10 people or 11 people, including the shop owner, are a democracy, then in the democracy those 10 people can vote in taxes that do exactly what a protection racket does: force the store owner to hand over a share of his wealth to support or maintain programs or policies initiated by the government, by the 10 exploiters, 10 freeloaders. There's no way around this association of protection rackets with democracy. And there's no way to escape the reality that democracy is simply freeloading, is simply a way to legitimize freeloading. Because no matter who the electorate is or who they vote in, they're always voting in the right for themselves or for their representative to extract wealth from the larger group or from another group. And the representative of the group may restrain the demands of the electorate and keep things more or less even or just to keep the society stable. But no matter what, if the government is not taking from the producers of wealth, they haven't got any grounds for existing. They have to do that because there's no way for them to exist other than that. By definition, all wealth is produced by a creator, and that's analytical logic, and you can't get out of that. All wealth is produced by someone, and that someone is a producer of wealth. All wealth, therefore, has to come from the group producing it. So any government, to maintain itself and to carry out programs and policies, must take wealth from the producers of wealth. And who are they going to give it to but a dependent group, an entitled group, a group of freeloaders? And so, all well and done, but this isn't explaining hate. But if we think of there being a right and wrong and a moral culpability, as it were, then a dependency on others has to be legitimized. Now, this isn't as easy to do as it might seem, because if God created everything and we want what God has, how do we get this? How do we legitimize the extraction of wealth from God? We have to look at him as a bad being, as a being with faults, with liabilities. And the same thing has to be done on a more human level. The rich, who are not without sin and who do not totally escape the left narrative, are usually the ones targeted for extraction. But how do you do that? It's the same problem. If I am dependent on the wealth created by others, and they aren't giving it to me voluntarily, how do I legitimize my forcibly taking this? There has to be a narrative to justify this. And so what is done is that I demonize them, and I say the wealth isn't theirs by right. I have a right to it. And this is what is done. This is where the source of hate comes from. You have to create a division and a demonization to legitimize the extraction. And the more you're trying to take and the more the other one is resisting, the more the hate has to be developed, because the more force has to be used to take what you want. And so the protection racket, the gangsters, will develop a very strong hatred for honest, decent people, because they need to have that hatred to legitimize the violence, what they inflict on people. And they become the good guys in their own mind, and the people who are doing business and trying to run stores and so on, they become the evil one. And this is why, or at least partially why, Jews are so universally hated. They always seem to be in that situation where they can be victimized, and because they can be victimized, then they can be hated, and they need to be hated to allow them to be victims. And it's just that's the answer for hate. That's why the Democrats hate the left, because the left has this entitlement narrative. They have the victimization ideology, and the right, not saints by any means, but generally the right has the wealth the left wants, and to extract that wealth, there has to be hate generated for the ones who are being targeted. And this again explains much of the hate directed at Trump, because he has all this wealth that the left thinks is unjustified and they think they're entitled to. But Trump doesn't apologize for his wealth. He doesn't have to put on his fake work clothes or his work boots or his kind of fake working man persona to talk to regular people. He's a billionaire who's a billionaire who's a billionaire. He likes his money, he likes the life he has, and he lives it, and he doesn't push it in your face, but he does nothing to minimize who he is either. And the left hates him because the left sees him as a target for their greed. Because there's two kinds of greed. There is the greed of the wealthy to make more money, to have more money. But there's the greed of the left for what other people have. So the left, the more they feel a need to right social wrongs, to express their social justice warrior status, the more they're going to hate. And there's nothing the right can do to alleviate that hate, because it's based on wanting access to what the right has. And the right generally is associated with a productive segment of society. And so we are the enemy of the left, just by virtue of our productivity and the wealth that we produce, because we claim this as our own. And the left has to demonize us to justify disassociating us from what we have produced. And again, there is reason for not accepting the right narrative in totality, but it's a story of two wrongs don't make a right. And the left, in their desire for social justice, are simply justifying their greed, and their hatred of the right is simply to justify their desire to overthrow the right and take what they have. And Trump stands in the way of this. Trump is getting people rich that are working, that are creating wealth, and he's not that supportive of the idea of freeloading, and so he is an enemy of the left. He is almost a devil incarnate to the left, because he's helping the productive people make and create wealth for themselves, and the left are left out in the cold, and their entire narrative is being dismantled. Their justification for their freeloading is being dismantled, and their narrative is being destroyed. And this is why they hate him, and this is why they hate the right. And so this hate is on the left. And even though the right may not look too kindly on the left, there's a certain objective justification for this, in the same way that the victim does not look with much love on the one that is robbing him. And if we understand that the robber has a conscience and only wants to rob those who are deserving of being robbed, and that best way of creating that justification is by demonizing the one that's being robbed, the hate in this world can be understood. And the problem is that we face is that if we keep patronizing the left, and if we keep siding with them to some extent, or trying to understand their viewpoint, we're actually creating enemies. The more we side to them, the more they're going to hate us, the more we're justifying the hate that's directed against us, because we're telling them that yes, we are greedy, we are evil, and yes, you have a right to take what is ours, and at some point we are going to have to say no, and we are going to have to get them to stand up on their own 2 feet and support themselves. And this is only going to make hatred, but there is no way around this. You cannot stop the hatred from the left. It's not possible. The only way to stop it is by eradicating the left. We have to totally eliminate liberalism, the left, every connotation they have. It has to be eliminated, and it's the only way the hate is ever going to end. A short comment on hell then. A lot of people don't understand hell, and of course they blame God for sending people to hell. There's a lot of misconstrued conceptions, ideas and so on about hell. Hell's not a place. Hell isn't created by God. And really, technically, God isn't sending people to a place that doesn't exist. What God created, God said, was good. And so far as I know, everything He created is good. But the point is, what God created, God created. And so it's His. I mean, He created it. Atheists reject God, and so why would they be heirs to what God created? It doesn't make sense. The reality God created was created in a way for mankind to understand. But it's an analytical logic we need to use, not synthetic. God spoke the world into existence. It's a logical conception, a logical way of understanding. And this is the problem with hell, is that people are trying to create a synthetic understanding of hell as if it's a physical place in a physical world, physical universe, but it's analytical. It's logic. If you reject the truth of God, what do you have? Well, you don't have the logic of God. You've rejected it. So how can you be a heir to it? How can you be a participant in it if you've rejected it? If you reject God, you've rejected the logic of God. You rejected His narrative, His thinking, His truths. So what do you have left? Well, I don't know. You tell me. But whatever you call it, I mean, basically it's hell. It's whatever isn't God. Whatever isn't God is what isn't God. And we use the word hell to say what it is, but it isn't anything. That's the whole truth of it. That's the logic of it. Hell is not God. Hell is what you're left with after you've rejected everything that God created. And I mean, who is the fault of that? Whose fault is that? Who's to blame? What do you think is going to happen if you reject everything that God has created? What do you think you're going to be left with? Answer that, and you've explained hell, I think, in a pretty good way, good as what we can understand it anyway. But you see, the problem is the people who reject God are leftist. And yet, as leftists, they think they're still entitled to what God created. And this is their frustration, this is their anger. They hate God and they reject Him. But they don't get what God created, and so they're even more angry, and they hate Him even all the more. And this is the paradox they're in. They can't let go of the hate, and they can't let go of the consequences of their hate. And so all they have is hate. That's all they have left. And that too is hell. Because all you have is what you created. And all you create as a leftist, as an atheist, is hate. And so that hate is what you are and what you have. as an atheist. And I don't know what else you expect to have or what you think you're entitled to. But regardless of what you think, God created it, God controls it, and your opinion, your feelings, your sense of entitlement is totally irrelevant, and nobody cares except you, and you only care because you hate God, and nobody cares that you hate God, and nobody cares that you want your hate. Nobody cares if you hang on to your hate. Hang on to it, it's yours, and do with it as you will. We have God, and God has us.